It's just incredible seeing all of our politicians do things that are so contrary to the interests of the United States. The self-interest of the country and ultimately themselves as well. So it just, and then that makes you wonder, like, well, maybe they're all pedophiles and being blackmailed by by
Well,
Israel.
I don't think we want to exaggerate that. I'm sure that happens at the margins. I think there's no question about it. But you don't really need to go to that explanation. It's overt. It's the money's right there. If we can, actually. Well, we see that, there's a statement made by a politician, and now, immediately, oh, this politician received so much from APAC. And it's a huge amount. You say, okay, well, he doesn't need to be a pedophile. It's just, we know what's going on here.
Yeah, well, I heard, I think it was that guy that was on Judge Knapp, it's just Ryan Dawson, I think. He was saying that it's not even so much that, all of the congressmen and senators are pedophiles that were filmed there. It's the elite donor class, actually, that you need to control. And then through them, you can control the politicians, so you have to have these just few powerful elite people that just have tens of billions of dollars that can just have undue influence with lobbying power, and those are the ones. But yeah, let's talk about Epstein a bit. I mean, do you think that this can break America? Because this story is not going away, and there's a lot of noticing going around. People are noticing, like, hey, what is going on here? We were promised all this stuff, and everybody's starting to realize that there's some connection with Israel. And you see the Zionist propagandists are pushing back really hard. Everybody's all of a sudden like, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, and everyone's
Yeah.
like, well, now there's something definitely we need to see here. And
Yeah.
this isn't going away, right? I mean,
Well, no, Trump wants it to go away, but it's not. This is the first time that we're talking about Iran. That really was not. There were criticisms from, again, maybe the more intellectual part of the MAGA base. And that may be meaningful, but by and large, his base supported him. Actually, again, 85% approval of what he did. Now, in the case of Epstein, no, that's not true. This is really hurting him. This is the first time where he is his base is starting to turn on him. Now, I did see a poll actually just this morning that showed that support for the administration's handling of the Epstein case is actually quite a bit greater among Republicans than it is among Democrats. You're getting all these stories about the angry base, but Democrats are actually even more disapproving. So what you find is, like, for example, among Republicans, something like 40% of Republicans disapprove and 38% approve. Among Democrats, it's something like 56% disapprove and 26% approve. But I think, just looking at that, because you always have this partisanship. He's our guy. He must have a good reason for it. You got to stand by him. Don't criticize him. And there are a number of people that will reflexively, but still, you had a majority of people disapproving, even among his base. So I think that's hugely significant. It shows that he has a real problem. And his efforts to just kind of shrug it off and blame it, pin it on the Democrats, they just haven't worked. They're ridiculous. The thing is, look, we all remember that I think there was some sort of press conference where those binders were handed out to the influencers, the Epstein files. And then we had Pam Bondi saying, I have the list on my desk. You can't just will that away. Everybody remembers that. So you've got a real problem here. Maybe it was of your own making. I know some people like Michael Tracy. He's a very interesting guy. He's not certainly not an establishment kind of person. For example, he was very, very, very critical of the J6 persecutions and supported the pardons. But he thinks that he believes that there was nothing there, that it was just Epstein. And he makes a pretty strong case. And I think it's true. Like, if you dig down real deep, you don't have firm evidence, proof that, we had this Mossad operation. But on the other hand, I think there's reason to strongly suspect it. Let me just put it that way. That there,
100%, of course.
Yeah. I wouldn't say 100%. I don't quite go there, but I say you have very powerful circumstantial evidence. You have somebody who was at the pinnacle of power. Epstein was a member of the Trilateral Commission. That's when you talk about, like, the secret cabal that's running the world. That gets exaggerated, but like the Trilateral Commission is closer to that than anything.
What
he
is
was
that?
okay, it's kind of it's an international, basically it was a coordinating committee that was created back in the 1970s, I believe. I grew up in Berkeley, so back then leftists worried about those kind of things and talked about it, the Trilateral Commission, that it was supposed to coordinate the U.S. and then its allies and sort of to just manage world affairs that way. So it's still there and it's very powerful, have very, very powerful members. And he was on it, and so he knew all these people. He was friends with something like 3-4 different Israeli prime ministers. His father, well, not exactly father-in-law, I guess Ghislaine Maxwell was not his wife, but his partner, his girlfriend, was. Again, it's not proved, and I have to admit that to Michael Tracy, but there's just very powerful circumstantial evidence that he was closely connected to Mossad. So you have this. We know that he was collecting these underage women. He had these connections with these powerful people. We know he had these big parties. We know that he had, again, this has been shown in court documents, that he had these secret cameras and so on and so forth. So there is very powerful. Maybe you don't have absolute proof, but everybody is, you have some people like, the establishment like New York Times saying this is just a wacky conspiracy theory. Say, no, this is, you look at this and you say like, it would be strange if this didn't happen, if there wasn't some sort of blackmail operation going on.
And
again, we
just
can't
the
prove
testimonies.
it, but I think that's probably that it is. I can't be 100% certain, but I think that's what's going on, and people have a right to see the files, And then so another thing is that, what was that deal about Elon Musk? And Trump's on the list. And then, when that happened, I just noticed that Trump just didn't say anything. He was just trying to avoid it. Say, well, wait a second. Maybe that's what's driving it. There's two things. I mean, there are two when you say, okay, the administration said nothing here, I think you have every reason to be very skeptical. Not just because, of the circumstantial evidence, but you think about, well, if in fact the Mossad was involved, if in fact Donald Trump was on the list, then of course they're going to try to shut it down, right? So I think people are very, very right to go after them. And maybe not as much as they think, but there's obviously something very, very fishy for many reasons. Something's really wrong here. And his base and everybody else has a reason to not let this go. They should keep on hounding Trump.
Yeah, well, it's fully front and center in public discourse now. I mean, everybody's going on about I don't think they're going to let him get away with it. So I just wonder, is that going to break the government? I mean, like what happens because what we're saying is that, our government is actually controlled by pedophiles that are being blackmailed by Israel because our elites, our donor class and politicians, or even the president potentially himself, they rape children on this island. They did, and there's videos of it. It's so messed up. It's so crazy. And like that's just, and you can't just say nothing to see here now when that is, and the more that people say that, more and more people are coming to the conclusion like, right. Well, I guess it's real. All of it's what a sick country we are that it is controlled by blackmailed pedophiles. That's nuts. That's I mean, and I'm starting to like it's got to be true to some extent. I mean, it's gone to the point. I was listening to a comedy podcast show, and they're just laughing like why did we bomb Iran? We're like, well, why do you think we bombed Iran? It's like, well, because all of our politicians are pedophiles being blackmailed by Israel. Obviously, it's clear. The people are making that joke. It's just like what are we even talking about? Right. Like that's just the joke. It's like, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, we do like, why do we do that? It's like, oh, well, Israel wants to do it, and they got footage of all of our elite, raping kids. Yeah, like what? And it's just like,
again, it's like if there really is nothing there, then you should be totally transparent. You should appoint a special counsel, and they're resisting that, which makes, again, there are reasons to be suspicious.
Right.
Very powerful reasons to be suspicious.
Right. So the more that it goes on, they're just going to just keep on denying, saying nothing to see here, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. And the people that say it the loudest, you see it online, are, the people that are in the Zionist camp, which draws that connection to Israel again. It's more and more. It makes me wonder. Do you know people like Ben Shapiro or Laura Loomer, these Zionist propagandists out there that. Do they believe what they're saying? Do they think that, actually, Jeffrey Epstein had no ties to Mossad at all? Or do you think that they're aware, they're complicit, they have to, God probably know, and they just, it's messed up.
I certainly wouldn't put it past them to lie on something like this, lie for Israel. I don't think there's certainly possible.
But I mean, it's
we don't know, but there's something wrong. There's something maybe it's just Trump there. There was somebody reported that he actually saw some like Polaroid photos of Trump with topless underage girls, And,
the whole thing is so sick, it's just like to think that this is what our country is run by is just, it's just the worst thing, Yeah.
Right. Oh, again, I don't deny. I think it's probably true that at least some of what we see is a result of direct blackmail. It's something that intelligence agencies do, and there's just no question about it. And people are right to put the administration's feet to the fire on this. They should keep on demanding transparency. I completely support it. But again, it's just so much of what's wrong is out there in the open. We don't have to reach for this. This is not what our arguments depend on. It's so much of what the corruption is there for everybody to see. Yeah, keep on pushing him on Epstein. I agree. But, let's not forget, it's not like that's what we need. Of course, it would be a real blow. It would be a huge blow if that came out and we found out that these suspicions were confirmed. But even absent that, there's just so much out in the open, so much open corruption and manipulation.
Right, but a lot of that corruption and manipulation, people can't see it as openly, or doesn't hit as home as much as the fact that we're talking about, our elite, our leaders raping kids on an island and then being blackmailed for it.
Yeah, that's something that everybody understands.
Yeah, right? That's right. So, I mean, I think, and if that just starts to become accepted, which it's starting to already, it's kind of becoming an accepted fact that, people are just like, oh, yeah, well, who's your country run by? Oh, we got this cabal of, corrupt, evil pedophiles that run our country. Right. Like that, you can't survive as a nation, as a government, if that becomes known.
Even if it, no light has ever shined, on this. If the administration remains adamant and just will not open the files, the damage has been done. Everybody remembers how they went out and said, "Hey, yeah, we got it. Here are the binders. Here's I've got the list on my desk." The things that Trump himself has said during the campaign is based. That was one of the reasons he got elected. It was just that he was the guy who was going to go in and clean things up. And this is going to really hurt them, and it's going to hurt their reputation of the U.S. in general, even if they, we never find out exactly what happened.
Yeah, but everybody, it's this unspoken fact that's everybody in the back of the mind, like, oh,
Yeah, well, in the end, you have to say if you don't, if you don't open up the files, if you don't appoint some sort of a special counsel or something, that why not? Something's clearly wrong. You're hiding something.
It's so crazy. So what does that mean for us as a nation going forward? This is a huge story that I don't think will go away. And the longer that Trump just says, why are we still talking about this guy? Why are we talking about Epstein? The more he says stuff like that, the more it's just going to be accepted. And then, like I'm saying, it's not acceptable for people. I hope not for our country.
No, I don't
to
think
say
so.
that it's okay that we have. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
unfortunately, the war crimes and have become acceptable over time. That's a sad truth, but I don't think maybe this is a line that we won't cross.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's just I don't want the future elections to be like, okay, what corrupt pedophile are you going to vote for? It's like, well, this corrupt pedophile is better, or will lower my taxes. So that's like this
Yeah.
is
No, there is a growing cynicism, and the cynicism is well justified. Yeah.
so. Well, what this means though, I think what's going to happen is that increasingly things like Epstein and your stance on Israel are going to become front and center for all politicians. They are going to have to take a stance, and they're going to have to, and people will notice if they renege on it, like Trump did. Like the people will hold their feet to the fire, and I think that's our only way out of it. Is that it's gotten to the point where now, no politician was sort of asked on their position on Epstein or the position with Israel. It wasn't really as contentious, but now I think this is becoming the most important issue for voters. I think so. It should.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
No, I think it is. There's a potential rebellion. I know that on True Social is basically Trump's own social media platform. He got ratioed on his own platform. This is the first. Yeah.
Good. Good.
So anyway, yeah. So there's real anger out there, and from the masses, from the base, and yeah, it's hurting him. He's only 6 months into, to his term here, and he's really already shot himself in the foot. And then he's also created a mess in the Middle East. He's painted himself into a corner with regard to Ukraine. He's in real trouble.
It's such a mess. There was so much hope and excitement when Trump came on the scene. And there were some reasons to be excited that first month. They're like, okay, maybe we got a ceasefire in Gaza. We're maybe restoring relations with Russia. And then when the tariffs started popping up, I'm like, oh, things are starting to go off rail here. What's your plan here?
Up again, it's really crazy. I mean, again, like the markets are betting that it won't happen, but that doesn't.
I think he'll do it.
Yeah, he just may very well. He clearly has an interest. He loves tariffs. It doesn't, in any case, it does not speak well of Trump. If they just think, he's just, this is more hot air. Forget the art of the deal. The idea is, well, okay, you make these great threats, and then the other side compromises and whatever. But now, people aren't believing the threats. That's a problem with making threats too often. Again, it's like the boy who never cried wolf. At some point, people start believing, or just bluffing in poker. You keep on bluffing, and then people see through you. It's not a very, let's say, astute method of negotiating. It's it's not the art of the deal. It's quite the reverse.
Do you think we'll make it to another presidential election, or that this whole country's going to collapse?
I think we'll make it to another one.
You think so?
I think so. But it's going to be. We're in for a wild ride with just 6 months. We're only a quarter. We're only a quarter. Not a quarter, an eighth of the way through it, right? And you're saying, are we going to survive the last 7/8 here? I don't know. I think so, but so much damage has already been done.
Right.
And it's not like the previous administration really, inspired a lot of confidence.
Yeah, no, it's just going from bad to worse. I'm just thinking that this is the end. This is the fitting end to the history of U.S. presidents. Trump will be the last one, and then I just don't think this government can survive. I don't think if we're saying that there's a chance that we'll look back on history and say this is where World War III started. If we see ourselves continually go down this path with Russia, Iran, people want to think it's over. We know it's just sitting there waiting to start back up again. And it's just a matter of time before it does, and that can sink everything. We got this trade war with China, and it's just been so clear that BRICS has now just said we're done. They know who the United States is. They know that the mask is off. They're aware of their position, and they're like, okay, we're done. We just got to make sure that we just try not to have nuclear weapons flying, but we can't deal with the United States anymore. That's the consensus of the world. It's just over. And then on top of that, you have this whole, the Epstein stuff, the whole fact that our government is one nation under blackmail, right? I mean, this is, we might be, we have these pedophiles that are in charge or that have undue influence over our country. And that they seem to be being blackmailed by Israel. And you just can't have a country if everybody's aware of this. You can't have a government that is like that. So it's just,
Yeah. Well,
it's done.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the days are numbered, but sometimes, yeah, again, governments can last a lot longer than you sometimes would think, just out of habit, out of inertia. I mean, it's just like, yeah, a lot of people stop really believing it, but it's just like, this is the machinery that's been set up. A lot of people are profiting from it. Yeah, they don't believe in it. They even feel kind of dirty associating themselves with it, but that's where they draw their checks. And things could go on for a long time. But then, of course, if the dollar really crashes, then it's maybe when you can't draw the check that the revolution will really occur.
Yeah. I think we're just so screwed, and this government is just evil. It's just so bad in so many ways. There's no redemption for it. It's disgusting. It's so disgusting that this is where we are as a country. What a disappointment.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable to me to think that this is America now.
Yeah, no, it is. I think very few people could have imagined the depths to which we've descended. Even 10 years ago, it was, I think 10 years ago, you could see we're on the trajectory. Maybe I should say 15, 20 years ago, it was still very hard to imagine that we would end up where we are now. There already were obvious problems, and there were reasons to be very angry. Of course, we're talking about the Iraq War and so forth. But yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's only going to get worse. We keep on thinking, or sometimes I find myself thinking maybe we've hit rock bottom. We always keep on descending. One of the things is like the crazier things become, it's just like people get used to the craziness. You were talking about too, what's happening in Ukraine and the Middle East. We have become used to war crimes. We've become used to escalation. People have just are habituated to it. And there was a time where there would have been a great deal of alarm. There would have been a huge, there were protests and so on. But it's just, you don't see it. People shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, that's the way these guys are. This is what happens, And they start to think that's normal. What's happening is normal.
Yeah. I mean, same thing on the financial side with the debt. People just don't think about it anymore.
Right.
And
people used to be worried about it when it was much smaller. And now it's just so huge and it's just so completely out of control that everybody looks the other way when it's,
Do you think we'll get to a point where people will just be like, I'm just not going to pay my taxes anymore because I don't want to pay my taxes to protect a bunch of pedophiles that want to support a genocide in Gaza because they are being blackmailed, Yeah.
Well, that's happened in the past, like some people protested the Vietnam War by not paying their taxes. But the thing is, the IRS comes after you and makes you pay. They just seize the money. That's the uncomfortable truth. So I don't think, it'll happen on the margins, but I don't see that happening on any large scale. Things will have to get even worse, a lot worse, I think, before that could happen.
Okay, well, like we said, we're only 1/8 of the way through Trump's some term, so probably by the time we get 3/8 on the current trajectory, things should completely fall apart. At the current rate. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we can end it there, unless there's any parting words.
No, I think we can end it here. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks a bunch, Dad. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Bye-bye.